All right, guys, welcome to your first AP Euro video. We're probably going to be doing these almost on a daily basis, just to be honest with you, because there's so much information to cover and there's so many things that we need to talk about. One of the first things that you're going to need to do is you're going to need to open up a Google Sheet. And for everything that we talk about and anything that I tell you to research, I really want you to have the cause and effect of each thing. For example, I had you look up the Easter Revolution in Ireland. I want you to take that and talk about, okay, what are the things that caused and led up to it? And remember, it's never just that one thing. There's so many different things that lead up to every major event that we're going to discuss in class. And I want you to then also talk about how it affects history as we move forward and how that's going to affect other things down the line. And so this week we're going to be talking about World War I, but not in the way that I think most of you might want to. We're not going to talk about the battles. We're not going to talk about the specific people involved in World War I. We'll talk about some of the weapons that are used. We'll talk about some of the events that occurred during World War I, such as the Russian Revolution. And we'll also look at some things that happened afterwards and how those things kind of set up history and really the Second World War and the interim period that takes place. One of the first things that we're going to look at today is the fact that there was new weapons in warfare. Now, we've already talked about the machine gun. The machine gun was amazing. The machine gun does a great job of just helping you mow down your enemies. And if you remember, the guy who created it was like, hey, I'm going to make this machine gun just so fewer soldiers have to fight. And what it ends up doing is increasing the size of all the armies because, well, I can kill your entire army in one swift blow with my machine gun. One thing which made World War I so devastating was barbed wire. Up to this point, barbed wire had been used exclusively to keep cows in their pastures. It gets a little interesting whenever you think about it because now we're keeping them on a battlefield with this barbed wire. But what they would do is they would set up these areas of barbed wire in an area known as the no man's land, and basically made it impossible to cross these places, slowing down troops and everything else so that they could throw grenades or just shoot them across no man's land. So they built these trenches all throughout Europe, and what it did is it slowed the war down and it made it extremely devastating. The death toll of this war alone would far surpass almost every other war that Europe has fought up to this point, and it's all because everything slowed down and they dug these trenches. You couldn't cross them. It just became bad. They also invented the poison gas. They would lob canisters of it into the trenches, and I'm sure you can kind of figure out what happened from there. One of the most deadly that was formed was mustard gas. And what it would do is it would literally just melt the skin off of your arms and off of your body. And you would feel it all. All of your pain receptors would be exposed to open air, and it's just not pleasant. They invented gas masks at this time, but most of them were faulty. Some of them worked, and that's glorious if you had one. But otherwise, the mustard gas could still affect your skin, and you didn't want to hang out there and try to do anything whenever that did take place. They also invented submarines, airplanes, and tanks. To be honest with you, though, our view of all of those are nothing for what they were in World War I. You could take a regular gun and shoot through a tank and kill the driver inside, so they weren't exactly that steel armor behemoth that you're going to see in about 20 years, nor were the planes, these bombers that would come in and that would just lay waste to whole entire areas. What you end up having are planes that are mostly there for reconnaissance because whenever they put a machine gun on the front, they would shoot their propeller off. When they put it in the back, they would shoot the tail off. So none of those were actually great ideas when it comes to fighting a war. And so what they did is they eventually invented a way for, as the propeller was turning or as the gun was turning on the back, you could it would have a safety that would engage so that you, one, didn't shoot your propeller, or two, shoot the tail off of your plane. But that comes a little bit later. And so mostly they were used for reconnaissance. In fact, the first guns that were used in planes at this time probably make you laugh, but were basically handguns, trying to shoot at other pilots. And for those of you that know anything about speed and bullets and everything, what you're aiming at with the amount of speed that you have, it's almost like you're in the movie Wanted and you're curving bullets because they're never going to hit their intended target because of the amount of speed that you're traveling and everything else. So with all of these new weapons in warfare, they really don't amount to much. The machine gun is probably the most deadly on top of the poison gases that were invented. And so that becomes, basically the war becomes a stalemate, and everyone just kind of sits there and shoot each other, and they die. I'd say one of my favorite moments of the war comes from the first year, where you actually have a Christmas truce between both armies. And they come out on Christmas Day, 1916, if I remember correctly, and they all come out and they celebrate Christmas together, the Germans, the French, the English. They sing Christmas carols. They actually played a soccer game on this day. And then they went back to their trenches the next day, and, well, war began again. Interesting fact, there was, I know of at least one German soldier who did not join in the festivities, and, well, he's going to have a really cool mustache in a few years and lead World War II. For those of you that don't know, i.e. Hitler, did not leave the trenches and go and celebrate Christmas with everyone else. So all of that brings me to a lot of the events that actually take place outside of the war, outside of the battlefield, and things that matter quite a bit because you're going to see a change in European history and the things that are taking place. For one, you've got the Easter Revolution or the Easter Rising, depending on who you talk to, in Ireland. The Irish rose up in 1916 in April. What was the date, girls? 24th. April 24th, 1916. The Irish see their advantage. The British are stuck in a stalemate war, and they think now is the time that we are going to get our independence from Britain. You see, what happened back in 1800, they had signed an act of union between them and Great Britain. And Great Britain's first act was to dissolve the Irish Parliament. The Irish didn't like that. They would have unsuccessful attempts at revolution and at trying to distance themselves from Britain again all the way up to 1916. None of them were successful. You need to know the one in 1916, though, because this leads the way for what happens in 1918 whenever they really do have some elections that push them towards their own independence once again. And in 1916, the revolution lasts for a grand total of 5 days. Again, they were counting on the British not being able to show up. So they have this armed revolution, and again, it's like Korg's revolution in Thor Ragnarok. Very unsuccessful. They don't accomplish much, but this is why it actually drew the Irish together and wanted them to push the British out. 54% of the people who died were civilians. Only 16% of rebels were killed during the battles, and 30% were the British soldiers. So whenever the vast majority of those who were killed were just innocent civilians who were caught in crossfire, and the fact that it took place in Dublin and a good chunk of the city was burned or broken down, this is going to cause some problems, and people are going to be very, very upset that this has taken place. And so what happens is the Irish begin to, all right, we need to change things, and then they begin to do it more politically speaking than, hey, we've got guns, because they finally understand that maybe we shouldn't fight them because we won't be able to do much in these cases. And so the Easter Rebellion is absolutely important for Irish, freedom as of 1918. Also, one important thing to understand, by the time you get to 1918, the British don't care as much about fighting anyone because they've just acquired, or they will be acquiring, some very important land here shortly, which is going to help their empire out a whole lot more than just holding on to Ireland or any other small group, and we'll talk about that shortly. The Russian Revolution is one that you definitely need to know, because the Russian Revolution, now for those of you that looked it up, you might have accidentally come across the um, Revolution of 1905. That's good, and it leads up to the 1917 Revolution, but it's not the one that we were looking for. We're looking for the one in 1917, Susanna. So in 1905, they do have a workers' revolution, and essentially what happens, Nicholas agrees to have a Dumas, which is essentially a parliament that's geared towards making life better for the Russian citizen and making the citizens feel like they have a voice in the government. Now, if there's one thing that we know about czars, it's that they really don't like to give anyone power. And over the next 12 years, Nicholas does a very good job of disbanding the Dumas every time they disagree with him. He's like, all right, you disagree, be gone. I have a quote from Star Wars running through my head from episode 1, be gone, but don't worry about that. You don't need to know that. So he would always kick out the Dumas, which again is only going to anger the people, and he calls them back, and then he kicks them out and calls them back. A very good absolute monarchist, if we really admit he's doing a great job of doing all that. And so in 1917, you actually have two revolutions take place. One in February, or March if you're in Russia, because they don't accept the Julian calendar until 1918. And then another one's going to take place in November. And so the Russian Revolution in February actually ousts Nicholas from the throne. And it actually takes him, and he removes himself. Well, certain people, i.e. if you're Lenin, aren't too excited by this, and the temporary government that's brought in as a result. And so Lenin thinks, you know what, we need more of a voice, we need more of a change, and, well, then you have the Bolshevik Revolution. By 1918, Nicholas and his family are captured and they're killed, basically ending any chance of a Romanov rule from this point forward, which is the first time in hundreds of years for Russia, because the Romanovs have been in charge for quite some time. And so they're killed, but actually the revolution doesn't stop. Lenin this whole revolution pulls Russia out of World War I, which keeps them from gaining any sort of great ground in history. And by the way, just a fun fact, Russia in the last 100 years has tried to capture Afghanistan a couple of times, and I'm sure a lot of it has to do with oil. They actually could have gotten all that land for free if they had not had a revolution and they had stayed in World War I, because the Allied powers broke up the Middle East among themselves, and because Russia left early, sorry, you get nothing. So that's basically what happens there. And so as Russia is pulled out of the war, Lenin leads this. 1918, the revolution continues on even after the war is over. In fact, it won't be over until 1923, 1922, one of those two. 1923, thank you. 1923, it's all said and done. It's over, and the Russian Revolution officially changes Russia for the next 70 years. Well, 80 years if we're really being right on top of it. So for the next 80 years, they're going to be communist, and Russia will really never be the same, because when communism comes in, it's going to change the way that they do things. It's going to change everything fundamentally for them. And so the Russian Revolution will be a movement that's led by the people. But really, it becomes a movement by just a few people. And the people will once again be put down, and they're going to realize that they actually had it better under the absolute monarchy of Nicholas II than they do under Lenin and any of his future successors, if you will. And so those are just a couple of the revolutions. One last thing that you guys definitely need to know for this section, especially speaking about World War I guess two more things actually. The British did a great job. They discovered that oil was in the Middle East during World War I. And the British needed to get the Ottoman Empire busy with attacking someone else other than the British, the French, and helping the Germans. So they got T.E. Lawrence to come in and talk to all the Bedouins in really the countries that they're not even countries, what we would call Iraq, Palestine, Syria, all these areas. They were still a Bedouin people that traveled the desert. And so T.E. Lawrence's job was to go into these areas and to convince them to fight against the Turkish and to overthrow their masters. And in return, he promised them that they would be completely free from this point forward. The only problem with that is they found oil after T.E. Lawrence had made this promise. And so the British, being British, and we all understand this, don't give them freedom after the war. In fact, they come alongside of them and they have what's known as the mandate system. The Arabs groups, they respond overwhelmingly and they fight against the Turkish, and lo and behold, they win. They keep the Ottoman Empire busy and effectively defeat it, so that after the war there is no more Ottoman Empire and you have the creation of Turkey, the modern day Turkey that we see today. And so you have these sweeping changes across Arabia, and these people are actually excited, like, we'll be free for the first time in forever. Sorry, all of you Frozen people out there. Didn't mean to get that song going in your head. But, so they think that they're free, but then at the League of Nations, they start what's known as the mandate system. And the mandate system literally says, okay, anywhere that Germany or the Ottoman Empire controlled will now be divvied up among the Allies. Britain, France, and the United States got the Middle East. Everyone else got Africa and holdings in the Philippines, or not the Philippines, the Pacific. The Pacific. But this is a great time. The oil has been found, and so they break it down into the Class A, B, and C. Class A is, we recognize your independence, but we're still going to hang around to make sure you do things right. And those were mostly your oil-rich countries, and they kind of hang around. In fact, they will hang around until World War II. Some of these countries will earn their independence in the 1920s, but most of them will not get it all the way until World War II begins, because, once again, the British are too busy fighting to be able to stop them from gaining their independence. And the Arab countries are actually pretty ticked that this is going on at this point in history. And so you're actually going to see repercussions of this throughout history. The Arab people in and of themselves are very good at remembering wrongs that are done to them, which I think most peoples are. I shouldn't just say Arabics, but they do have a history of telling, okay, this person did wrong, and so I want you to remember this, son. If there's ever a chance to get revenge, then you take that revenge. And so you're going to see the actions of the British, the French, and the U.S. kind of play out through history as they promised them freedom after the war, but then because they found oil, you know what, guys? We really feel like you need help, and we're going to be that help just for you. Just for you. And so they're going to kind of hang around more than they're wanted. Now, the last thing that you need to know is the peace that ends World War I. This treaty isn't much of a treaty. What it's going to do is it's going to set the stage for World War II. They're going to lay the entire guilt, the war debt, on Germany themselves, and they're going to tell them, well, you got to repay it. The problem is it was sent to two of the greatest financial minds in the world, and they literally told them, they said, if you do this, World War II will happen. You will have a second world war because you are going to disenfranchise a whole people. You are going to basically bankrupt them, and who knows what's going to come along and fill the void in that country. And literally, looking back, hindsight is 20/20. I get that, but they weren't wrong. And what happens is whenever you destroy the economy of a country, remember we talked about Karl Marx and we talked about the playbook of making a country socialist. The playbook is the first thing you do, destroy the economy. And once you destroy the economy, the people will accept anything in order to get back to a certain sense of normalcy. And so the Germans literally get to that point where they're looking for things to be normal once again. All right, so kind of keep that in mind as we move forward. And a couple of things that I want you to know as we move forward. I want you to look up, I guess I'll actually have to write this on the board. Versailles Peace Conference. Let's just do one thing. Nope, this way. The Versailles Peace Conference is what you need to make sure that you're looking up. We're going to look at that more in depth and look at the gesturing of the different countries at this time. And we'll also look at the Russian Revolution a little bit more in depth than just saying like, hey, this changed everything in Russia. So have fun with that. But that's the one that I want you to have on your document. Just do some quick cause and effect, and we'll see you next time.